Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
This stuff that you're telling me is like blowing my mind right now.
A couple of weeks after the mass shooting, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau actually implemented a ban on assault-style weapons.
Well, yeah, it says he would get packages delivered to his friend's house in Maine for like various parts, and some of the parts that says were for motorcycles, some of the parts were actually for the replica police cars.
But the inquiry is kind of the next best thing. It's kind of like the RCMP is on trial, in a way.
They could have done the simple thing and just put out generic information like stay in your house, lock your door, and shut your window or shut your blinds. And they could have done that not just on Twitter and other social media, but they should have done that as a public alert.
Hi everyone, welcome to Crime Family. So this is part 2 of our 2-part season finale. So we are talking about the Nova Scotia mass shooting that happened back in 2020, and I'm assuming you listened to our first part already, but I just wanted to remind you as well that we will be discussing, intense topics like domestic violence and gun violence. So just wanted to place the warning up front. It might be disturbing to listen to. And so in the first part, we just kind of got a little bit of a detailed timeline of the events of April 18th and 19th leading up to Wortman's death after he was at the Enfield gas station, after he killed 22 people and injured 3 others. Of course, it was the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history, and there were so many mistakes made by the RCMP that kind of came out later, and there was the Mass Casualty Commission that formed and kind of looked into the investigation of the killings, and also looked into the events of that night and where the RCMP went wrong and all of this stuff. So there is a really great website. It's masscasualtycommission.ca, and it has all of the documents from the inquiry and a lot of really good information. And of course, it is very detailed. It's still ongoing because it was formed in 2020 and the hearings are happening now. So I feel like every few days while there's hearings, there is all these updates that are still coming up. So it isn't complete necessarily yet, but there is some information that did kind of come out, and some of it is quite shocking. And I just want to talk a little bit about, so there was one detail about just kind of the horror of it all. One thing that did come out in the inquiry was, it's a really, really sad detail, but I'm just going to kind of read from the National Post article here. But so quote, "This is a piece of information that hasn't been included in the inquiries thus far, but the Fitbit of victim Heather O'Brien, who was age 55, apparently showed her having a heartbeat for several hours after the police had declared her dead. On the morning of April 19th, O'Brien had been on the phone with her friend Leona Allen when Wortman fired several shots into her parked Volkswagen Jetta. Allen would tell investigators she heard screaming, quote, thud, 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 and then nothing. Constable Ian Fahey was one of the first to see O'Brien after the shooting and would tell the commission that she was not showing a pulse and her fingers were, quote, cold. Another attending officer, Devonna Coleman, would say the same thing. However, both of these were contradicted by Fahey's police report from that day, which said that O'Brien had been registering a weak pulse and had been making slight noises. Which is just crazy. So the fact, and her Fitbit was recording her heartbeat, and she did have a heartbeat for hours after the fact. So the fact that they didn't even, it's just crazy to me that detail came out and it really stuck with me because I remember, like, mom actually told me about it back in like April when it came out, that detail. But the fact that she wasn't even technically dead, like she still had a heartbeat, and the fact that they just didn't tend to her or didn't bring her to the hospital, and I don't know.
They didn't do CPR on her?
Well, apparently not according to this article. I mean, maybe they did at first, but she was still breathing and she still had a heartbeat for hours after that, and they just kind of,
as an officer or anybody who's on the scene first, like, you have to do CPR whether you not have to, but you should do CPR whether they're dead or not, because they might not be completely dead.
Well, yeah, I don't think a police officer can declare someone dead. Like, don't you actually need the, like, EMTs to do that? So you have to recall them regardless, don't you? Somebody else has to be there to do that. They can't just be like, oh, she's dead, let's move on. I know, and that's the way how it seems. And then it also says, quote, in this article, quote, ambulances weren't being allowed into the area in case Wortman were to return. So Fahey himself would turn O'Brien's daughter, Micheal Scott, away when she attempted to reach the Jeddah. Quote, you need to go. It's not safe for you to be here, he told her. Scott's own testimony to the commission would say, quote, they took away my right to hold my mother's hand to say goodbye, end quote. So it's crazy. And then also this article goes on to say, and in a Facebook post earlier this month, O'Brien's family posted data from her Fitbit showing that she was registering a heartbeat as late as 6 p.m., nearly 8 hours after her daughter had tried to reach the scene. Quote, we know this information is controversial, end quote, read the post. The Fitbit data has not been included in an official commission account surrounding the events that killed O'Brien, although the commission has reportedly left open the possibility that it could be submitted as evidence. And that doesn't really, I guess that part of it wouldn't be like about the actual events of the killing and Wortman's path, but it would kind of just show kind of the carelessness that went along with some of this information.
And you said they weren't letting EMTs in because of they're afraid?
Yeah, well, this article says ambulances weren't being allowed into the area in case Wortman were to return. So this is all like directly quoted from the article. So this is what it says. So this would have been before he was obviously killed, or before they knew.
But what? I'm just confused. What does EMT, like? I mean, I get for their safety, but like, somebody's hurt. They need somebody to help them. I don't understand that.
Well, maybe I don't know. I think obviously they're not going to know that her Fitbit is recording her heartbeat, so maybe they just thought she was dead, and they're like, "We don't need an EMT here." I don't know. Like we said in the past, when Katie was talking about the timeline, like there was just so much going on, and nobody was acting in the right way, and everyone was just frantic. And obviously, you know, these same people are shooting into fire halls, and just acting crazy. I don't know. So I'm not surprised, even though it was kind of jarring to hear it, or read it, but it's not. Also, doesn't surprise me, just considering everything else we know about kind of what happened.
Yeah, that's sad because she could have been saved if the proper people were there to examine her or actually confirm that she was still alive. So that's sad.
Yeah, and like, I just feel so bad for the family knowing this piece of information. And I mean, I feel like a Fitbit doesn't lie if it's recording her heartbeat. Obviously, she had a pulse, so it's just the lost potential too of like, well, they could have saved this person, and either they didn't have the wherewithal to do it, or they were just preoccupied. I don't know. I mean, there's no really excuse for it at all. So I don't want to sit here and try to justify it, because it can't really be justified, to be honest. And then another detail that did come out about the inquiry too was, it's also included in the same National Post article, but there's allegedly roughly 44 people who have reported coming within sight of Wortman during the killings, meaning that they were likely only a few seconds removed from becoming victims themselves. And the most notable is RCMP Corporal Rodney Peterson, who saw Wortman bearing a, quote, unsettling grimace, end quote, drive past him going the opposite direction at 9:47 a.m. on the massacre's second day. Quote, if I stop and this is the bad guy, I'm going to get shot here. I'm going to get killed, end quote. This is what he would later tell inquiry lawyers. He continued on for more than a kilometer before turning around, reasoning that if he tried to turn around on the tight confines of the 2-lane highway, he would be ambushed while performing a 4 or 5 point turn. By the time Peterson was able to start driving in Wortman's direction, he wasn't able to find the shooter. So that's also pretty jarring that he like drove past him and still had to take time. Oh, I don't feel safe turning around here, or I can't do this, or whatever. It just seems like he was scared and didn't know how to face. I don't know.
You're a fucking police officer.
I know, this also goes back to, like, aren't these people trained in these situations to be able to do this? Like, it's just crazy to me that you can say, oh, I didn't feel safe turning in this. Like, it's a fucking deserted road, probably. There's not that many people on the road. Like, just do something. Like, it's just crazy to me. I don't know.
I'm sorry, but this stuff that you're telling me is, like, blowing my mind right now. Like, I don't remember any of this. Like, I read some stuff about the inquiries, but I don't remember any of this. Like, you're a police officer. Your job is to turn around and catch the person that's doing whatever they're doing. If you're scared, don't be a police officer.
I know, it just doesn't really seem like his justification makes sense at all. I didn't feel like I could make a 4-point turn here safely, so I had to go down the road a little bit before I felt safe I could do it, and then by that time he's gone. Well, obviously he's gone. He's driving away, probably at fast speed.
I'm sorry, this is like boiling my blood.
Yeah. And this is
like
from, and like I said, this is from the National Post article from April 9th, 2022. And some of this, like, I literally just read from the article because I didn't want to misinterpret it, or I didn't want to get the wrong information. But yeah, that's literally what it says. So that's like just two of the things. And because the inquiry is still going on, it's kind of like they're having hearings every day. There's so much information out there. So it's kind of a lot of just how they fucked up and the various ways in which they fucked up.
I feel like between these new inquiries and when the news got first around that all this shit happened, like, I feel like the police are doing the opposite in this situation. They're supposed to be there to serve and protect the public, and I feel like they're doing the fucking opposite. Like, running into the fire hall and fucking, well, not into the fire hall, but shooting a police officer at the fire hall, and then you get them not doing CPR on a victim, and then this, like, it's just fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, it does seem like they're doing the opposite in every situation that they should. Like, that they're going to shoot at actual police officers, but then not shoot at the actual person.
Yeah, and it kind of just makes it seem, it's like, well, they were, in that moment, they're like, well, every person for themselves. Like, I'm going to do this to protect myself. Like that one guy, he's like, well, I don't feel safe turning around here. It almost seems like, oh, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. It's just, who are these RCMP officers? Like, is this the best we have?
I get, like, this was like a shock to everybody. Like, this was like the one, like, it's the worst mass shooting there was in Canada history. So maybe they weren't, like, prepared 100%, but do your fucking job properly. Like, don't be scared if somebody's gonna come shoot at you. That's what you have weapons for. I know. It's pretty crazy. And I think the inquiry just kind of, as it goes, it gets more and more, as more information comes out, it's almost like no one can be shocked anymore by the information that comes out, because it's just like every one thing that comes out is just like worse than the last. Painting the RCMP is a very bad picture to Nova Scotians, that we can't trust them with all this information coming out. It's like, if we can't trust our RCMPs, who the hell can we trust? And I mean, it's not necessarily a foreign concept, because I mean, in many of the cases we've covered on the podcast, it's police misconduct and kind of things you can't really explain other than they're just incompetent or they don't want to do their jobs properly. So it doesn't surprise me, but it almost seems like a lot of it necessarily isn't intentional. It just kind of shows how incompetent they were. Maybe like they were trying, but even their best effort was far beyond, or far less than what was required, is what it seems like anyway. Yeah, it just seems like they were very unprepared and like didn't know how to handle the situation at all, and just made all the mistakes. And like, this man was able to drive around for 13 hours across the province and kill 22 people in 13 hours in various different locations. It just seems, it almost makes you wonder, like, and one thing I was thinking about too was that the fact that there's a lot of, like, most of Nova Scotia is rural, right? Like, you have Halifax and Dartmouth, which is like the city center of the province, but everything else other than that is pretty much rural, more or less. So just makes you wonder that, like, in some ways, Nova Scotia was the perfect place for something like this to happen, because if this was happening in a big city, you know, you're not going to get too far. There's so many more people that could be witness to things, so many more people that could call and report things. So I feel like in some ways, because it was a rural community, and it was kind of the perfect environment for something like this to happen, which is so sad. But it makes you wonder, like, I don't think anything like this would happen in a larger city. What do you guys think? Definitely not, right? Like, you're not going to have someone drive around for 13 hours. Well, no, that wouldn't, like, where you live, AJ, that wouldn't have never happened. You wouldn't have somebody going around shooting people for 13 hours in downtown Toronto. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, the police are definitely incompetent here in many ways too, but not. It just wouldn't happen. There's, like I said, there's so many more people that can report things and call 911 and track his movements, right? Like anywhere you go in the city here, there's going to be someone that can witness it versus, in rural Nova Scotia.
And a lot of those places, like a lot of places here in Nova Scotia, don't have the best like cell reception. So even if you were trying to report something, like you'll have to there's a lot of places out here that don't have service. So like if you were trying to report it, you saw him somewhere, you'd have to like go somewhere where you had service, and that could be like a long mile down the road or something. So it's harder to get in contact with people because of where you live, but it's also a smaller area, so everybody knows everybody too. So it just, I don't know. Either way, it's a horrible situation that happened, and it should never happened.
And also too, I was actually going back to I was looking at, because like Steph, Katie, and me, and our other sister Lisa, we have like a group chat for the four of us, and I was actually going back to like the chat on that day just to see, and there was an article I think somebody put in the chat just about this, and the article even said Gabriel Wortman is in custody. So even the initial article didn't say that he died; it was that he was in custody, which is obviously, how did they get that wrong? Like,
yes, I did. I think I posted that.
Yeah, I think you sent it to us in the group because you're like, oh, he was caught. I was like, how do you get that wrong? I mean, that could have been the media's fault also, but the RCMP obviously wasn't releasing that information. So either is he in custody or is he dead? Like, I don't know.
But I don't understand why they handcuffed him even though he was dead. Or was he dead?
They said, this was from the Nighttime podcast again, they said that he likely was already dead, but just to be safe, they handcuffed him when they took him out of the car, just in case, and because they didn't want to take any chances. But maybe that's just maybe he technically was in custody because they handcuffed him, whether he's dead or not, because you can still be dead in custody. So, right? So maybe that's just protocol to say he's in custody.
Yeah, I guess. But when I hear in custody, I don't think he's dead. Like you think, oh, shooter has been killed versus he's in custody. Like, oh, he's, in custody. But I guess it makes sense. He's arrested. He's technically in custody, even if he's not alive.
Yeah, I wonder how long it took them to say that he was actually dead.
Yeah.
Like when did they release that? I wonder.
Like, I don't think that was too much later, but I think initially everyone thought no one knew that he had actually died. They just thought he was captured. But then there was the whole thing of, there was a little bit of a mystery in terms of, did he get shot by the police officers or did he kill himself? Because there were, I think, the things that came out in the inquiry. There's also a book written about the mass shooting, saying that he had turned the gun on himself around the same time that they started to shoot. So they thought that maybe he had actually shot himself and that's how he died versus the police actually being the ones to kill him. And I don't really have an answer either way about which one it actually was. Not that it really matters at the end of the day, but I mean, if the police are saying that they killed him, he's dead because we killed him, like, well, he killed himself, probably because he knew it was the end anyway. Also, there's just an interesting note, and we can also kind of have a larger discussion about this, but a couple of weeks after the mass shooting, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau actually implemented a ban on assault-style weapons across Canada. And I mean, I feel like that is a natural thing to do when you have a mass shooting and somebody who is using a weapon that is not legal, or maybe was able to obtain it because they weren't strict enough, even though we did get it from the States, allegedly. But I don't know. I just feel like that's a very a stark comparison to what you see in the States, for example, when they have mass shooting after mass shooting and nothing happens. So when you compare it to here, he actually was able to ban assault-style weapons after the shooting.
But it's unfortunate that it took a mass shooting in Nova Scotia for that to happen.
I know. I mean, technically it was part of his platform when he got elected or re-elected, but he didn't actually do it until the mass shooting, which is annoying that it took that to actually happen. But he did it regardless. So it's just interesting to kind of compare those two things. But it's kind of interesting, though, because I thought that assault rifles were already banned in Canada before that. But apparently Justin Trudeau made them illegal after the shooting. So obviously they weren't. Or maybe he just made it, or maybe they weren't full on illegal. Maybe there was like restrictions or something, but now they are actually fully illegal. But anyway, he definitely did something towards gun control legislation after the shooting. And I just think it's interesting because it's such a stark difference in what you get from the States when they have a mass shooting and literally nothing changes. ever.
If Justin Trudeau can ban weapons here in Nova Scotia, I'm pretty sure the President of the United States can also ban weapons.
Oh yeah, well, he can, but not going to. That's the thing.
I'm just saying, like, if we can do it, then obviously they can do it.
I just feel like it sucks that it took this 22 people dying and this to have that happen. But I mean, at least it shows you that it happened, and it's actually somebody taking action after something like this. But there was a little bit of kind of a controversy as well, and the Liberal government kind of came in under fire because during the whole inquiry there was allegations that the Liberal government interfered in the RCMP investigation after the shooting had happened. So and it kind of took place in that 2-week period between when the shooting happened and when they banned assault rifles, and it was because they were trying to get information about the type of weapons that were used, which apparently the RCMP knew at the time, but it wasn't released out in the public. And there was kind of allegations that the Liberal government kind of interfered in the investigation so that they could get that information for their assault weapon legislation that they're going to enact. So there was kind of a little bit of there of like, how much did they meddle in the investigation to get that information? And then there was like a lot of articles back and forth about that, people defending it, saying, no, we didn't have any information. It was the RCMP that had full control of the investigation, and like we didn't know anything more than they did. But then there was other information that came out that said that the Liberal government was promised that the RCMP was going to say in their press conference the type of gun that was used, but then they didn't. And then that was the whole thing. So it's kind of a lot of that as well, like a lot of political turmoil as well in terms of how much they knew or didn't know. And I'm not really sure. Again, that doesn't really change anything about the shooting itself, but just kind of like interesting.
My other concern and question is, like, how did he get those weapons across the border? Unless I guess if you're not suspicious, they don't really search your car.
Well, yeah, like he got them from the States, but I don't necessarily know, unless somebody else does, like how he got, like, Jennifer, yeah, you sent me this article from Maclean's magazine, which actually came out in October of 2020 about this $300,000. And it says, quote, through a friendship with a disgraced New Brunswick lawyer and a possible real estate scam in 2010, Gabriel Wortman netted hundreds of thousands of dollars, which he then allegedly used to buy some of these weapons. It's also hard, too, because a lot of the stuff that came out in 2020 was kind of, like Katie said at the beginning, a lot of misinformation was out there at the time. So I don't know how much like stuff from 2020 is legit.
In my article that I found, that was from May of 2022. It says that the gunman took the 5-hour drive to Maine 15 times over 2 years prior to the shooting.
Yeah, well,
so he drove there 15 times.
Well, yeah, it says he would get packages delivered to his friend's house in Maine for various parts, and some of the parts that says were for motorcycles, some of the parts were actually for the replica police car. So it's a lot of people buy parts for guns and then assemble them to at their own house. So they're not purchasing this whole gun that's going to have to come through the fucking post office. They buy little pieces here and there so they can build it. And if it's illegal in the States, then he could just buy all these little pieces and then go pick them up.
And I wonder, that friend that he was FaceTiming with or whatever on the day of April 18th, is this the same friend from Maine? Because that guy was from Maine, right? So are these the same friends that he was shipping these stuff to and then getting them?
I think it is, but I don't know.
Yeah. It's just kind of coincidence that it's both people from Maine, but also wasn't, and also Lisa, Gabriel's partner, was also charged, right?
There's 3 people in Canada that were charged with helping him get ammunition, I guess. So one of them was Lisa, the other one was Lisa's brother, and then her brother-in-law. So yeah, they were all charged with supplying him with ammunition. They probably didn't know what he was going to use it for, but it was obviously illegal.
But I guess this kind of leads into the next thing I was going to talk about, but it's not really, you kind of said a little bit at the beginning, Katie, when you went into who Gabriel was, but he's not someone who was unknown to be violent. He did have like violent tendencies in the past. And there was one article that I've seen here from CTV News Atlantic from just March of this year, talking a little bit about Gabriel's past. So I think this is the uncle that you were talking about before, who was a Mountie in the past, but it says, quote, he said he was aware of Gabriel Wortman's previous plans to kill his parents, which weren't carried out, and his severe beating of his father during a trip to the Dominican Republic years ago. But like, this is somebody who has a past, like a history of being violent, and already had like multiple complaints about him. So it's just my thought that like, somebody who's known to be violent and you're going to supply him with these firearms, I feel like, yeah, you don't think that he's going to go on this violent rampage, but also you have to kind of know you're supplying ammunition to this person who's violent. Like, nothing good can come from that, right? Like, I'm not the only one that would think that. Like, clearly you have to kind of think about what you're doing there.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And Lisa would for sure know that he was violent because he was, like, abused her. But, I mean, you know, she was a victim of his, an abuse victim. So, you know, she probably wasn't going to stand up to him. Yeah,
that's true. She didn't feel comfortable standing up to him for that. But, and also I read this article too, I was doing research, like one of the first articles that came out in 2020 after this happened, it was from like the Edmonton, some newspaper in Edmonton, but it said Wortman was, quote, a quiet man, which is like, I feel very, I mean, maybe they didn't know the extent of who he was back then, obviously, but like, I just feel like that's a vast misrepresentation of who he was. And it's also kind of like saying, oh, he's a quiet man, like, no, he was. I mean, he might have been quiet, but he was very. I feel like that paints a very different picture of who he actually was, like a person with a violent history who friends knew was like. Even that uncle knew that I always thought he might kill his partner or his parents. Like, that doesn't really paint the same picture as someone who's a quiet man.
But I feel like quiet is not a descriptor that you would use for anyone's like violent tendencies. Like, quiet people can be violent and so can loud people. So he was quiet. It's like, that has nothing to do with the situation, I feel. Yeah, also when we were talking about earlier how like what pushed him over the edge, there was an article written by CBC, and this was in March of 2022, and Lisa Banfield says that in the weeks leading up to the shooting, he kind of started to unravel. He was drinking a lot. He had buried hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, so just buried it somewhere. He made unusual comments about evading police and wanting to die. So obviously something was happening, and kind of that was like the end of his spiral, was to do this shooting spree. So I mean, there was warning signs, I think, but just nobody picked up on them in time.
There was like those warning signs too, but he was also, didn't people know, because I feel like I would read all these articles that like people knew that he would collect old RCMP vehicles. Like, how many warning signs do you need? Like, he's collecting these RCMP vehicles, he has a violent history, and people know this, and they're giving him ammunition. Like, what does he need it for? Did they know he was an avid hunter? Did they think he was an avid hunter? Like, to me, it's like, how many red flags do you need?
I remember reading something somewhere, like back when all of this happened. It was like a couple months after the mass shooting happened, and it was that someone had reported to the police before that he had these replica police, like he was impersonating a police officer, but nobody ever came to the house to like check on it or something like that. I think I read that somewhere. I'm pretty sure. I don't remember where, but...
Well, and part of the problem too is that there was so much that came out initially, and like we said, a lot of it was misinformation. So I feel like I'm mixing up a lot of what was misinformation versus what wasn't. Because wasn't there also what came out? It was like that he was at, like, one of the first things that said he was at a big house party that night, and then he like left and got into a fight with Lisa, and then went back and killed everyone at the party. But that obviously wasn't true. He wasn't at a big party, right? Like, none of that came up in that timeline that you just said, Katie.
No, I didn't see that anywhere. Unless that's what they were doing before they went home and FaceTime their friend. Because the timeline kind of starts, they go on a little drive and then go home. So that could have been before that, but I don't know. But they did. But you think it would have mentioned that he went to the party and killed everybody. Because that would have been part of the timeline.
Yeah, but none of those people that he killed, like those first people, none of those people were at a party with him before that.
No,
right?
I didn't find anything. like that.
Yeah. So I just find it weird that, like, how is all this misinformation coming out? I mean, that's not unusual, really. I feel like something that's as high profile as this, too. Everyone's kind of, things get thrown in there, rumors or whatever. But I just feel like it's a very weird detail of, like, oh, he was at this party and went back and killed everyone, when we just heard that that's not what happened. Or it's at least misrepresentation of what happened.
Yeah, and I remember reading something, too, about, like, he wasn't well liked by his neighbors either. And they complained a lot about him, so...
Well, yeah, there's another thing that came out early on, too, so I don't know if this is true, but that he would invite his neighbors over to show them his gun collection and would kind of go on about guns, and it kind of made them uncomfortable, and I think one of them did report his guns to the police before, and that's kind of what got them on his bad side. So if that's true, then to me that could have been a trigger of why he, thought these people were his friends, but they kind of turned him in. That makes sense, but still, I don't know if that's true.
But then if that was the case and the police knew about him, then they would know his name. Do you know what I mean?
Well, they might have known his name, but in the moment, like, at 11 o'clock at night when all this happened, like, I don't know, are they going to put two and two together? That that's who that is? Like, when did they hear his name? I mean, I feel like Jamie said his name on that 911 call that we heard. But...
yeah, people kept saying Gabe, and she couldn't remember his last name, though. I remember, like, especially when you look at some of the transcripts, it'll say, like, Gabe something, Gabe this and that. Like, they couldn't remember his last name. And then I know Andrew, in his phone call, said Gabe as well. But nobody actually said Gabriel Wortman that I could find. So either they just didn't know his name, full name, or they just never said it in those 911 calls.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess... yeah, I mean, doesn't necessarily imply that you would know someone's last name just because you're their neighbor, but I feel like...
but they knew he was a denturist who lived in Halifax and collected cars, so I mean, they did know a lot about him. They probably just couldn't think of his name in the moment or something.
There was also a report or an article that came out that one of the people that was killed in the mass shooting was somebody that, like... he also had, like, a land dispute with some of his family members, and someone in his family had lent him their property when they went out. I think it was to Edmonton or some other part of Canada, and then when they returned, he, like, refused to relinquish the house back to this person. But the person whose property it was ended up selling it, and then one of the buyer who ended up selling it, or the person who ended up buying it, was one of the victims of the shooting. Because Gabriel had it out for him because he bought this property that wasn't even his to begin with, but it was just basically that he had stole it or refused to. He was a squatter, refused to, like, relinquish it when his family member came back, which is, like, also weird. So he had a kind of a history of, like, ripping off his family members or, like, owing money, or people owed him money or whatever like that. So it was kind of like a very messy situation.
Yeah, because it did say he was a scam artist.
Yeah. And I feel like people in his family had various stories or encounters with him where, like, similar things had happened.
Yeah, the similar thing that was happening, like the article that I showed you through Maclean's magazine, it was, they were going on about how he used to live in Fredericton. He went to UNB, and then he met this guy named Tom Evans or something. Anyway, I don't know if this article is 100% correct. Like you said, a lot of speculation and a lot of misinformation came out in 2020, but it all goes back to him being a scam artist and how he somehow got like $300,000 from this guy named Tom Evans after he sold his rental properties, and like he owned the business or something like that. Like, it's just, again, don't know if it's misinformation or if it really is true, but it would make sense if it was true.
Yeah, like, it kind of falls in line with, like, who we kind of see Gabriel as. And I feel like some of these articles, it's like there's maybe pieces of truthful information, but then it's not like a complete account. Like, it might have like one aspect of truth, but then, like, some of it was not right or was misrepresented or something. So I feel like the inquiry stuff that's coming out now is probably like the clearest picture of who Gabriel was. It's kind of very messy and very murky because, like we said, a lot of this information might not be truthful, a lot of it's speculation, but the stuff that's coming out in the inquiry is probably a lot more of the factual information. And I know there's looking up stuff about the inquiry, like there was a point where a lot of the families were unhappy with the conduct that was occurring during the inquiry as well, and some of the decisions that were made. So, like, of course, there's the Mass Casualty Commission members, or the people who make up this committee or are part of putting it all together, wouldn't allow for because there's a couple of lawyers that are representing all of the families of the victims, and there was a boycott of the commissions because at first they were going to a lot of the hearings and stuff, but then they ended up boycotting it because the commission would not allow the lawyers to directly question some of the RCMP officers. They just made that decision that they weren't going to allow that, and the families were very upset with that because they wanted the lawyers to be able to ask them direct questions, I guess going to some of the misconduct and stuff that had happened and clearing up some of the whys about how that happened. But for whatever reason, the commission just did not allow that to occur. So the families did boycott the hearings for a period of time. And then I did see a follow-up article that said that they, now they're not boycotting it. They are going to go to some of these hearings, but it's kind of like a rocky relationship or kind of one of untrust or mistrust between the committee or the inquiry people who are on the doing the inquiry and then the families. So I feel like there's a lot of that happening as well. It's not necessarily all great relationships there. And this is, of course, the inquiry is kind of the closest thing we'll ever get to a trial, because obviously Gabriel Wortman has died, so we're not going to get a trial of him, but the inquiry is kind of the next best thing. It's kind of like the RCMP is on trial in a way, because a lot of the stuff about their misconduct and how they just allowed this to happen is coming out. And of course the families are very upset. Like, of course you can imagine the family of that woman who was allegedly alive and her Fitbit was recording her heartbeat for hours after. Like, I can't imagine how they're feeling. And obviously they're going to have very hurt feelings towards the RCMP for that. And maybe they want to have their lawyers to be able to ask these officers direct questions, but they're not being allowed that access. So it's just very complex, and there's a lot of different things. Like, you have the RCMP and their stance, and they're just, I feel like, being embarrassed every single day with everything that comes out. It's like every week you hear something new about the inquiry that comes out, and it's basically just a big embarrassment for the RCMP. And obviously they're not happy with how that, with all this information that's coming out, because it's basically exposing them. But there's also, the inquiry also does kind of have a detailed timeline of, Katie kind of have said it, but the detailed timeline of the social media posts that they put out during the attacks, and like how the first one wasn't put out on Twitter until 11:32, but then the next one was at like 8 o'clock or 8:02 a.m. the next day, and it wasn't until 8:54 was the first time that they actually said Gabriel Wortman's name, because everything before that was just saying it's a active shooter situation. Residents in the area stay inside your homes. And then there's, an article about the people who were in charge of the Twitter posts or the social media posts. And there was a big delay because they apparently had gotten the information, but then there was that huge, it was 27 minutes between when they got the information and when the first tweet was put out. So there was a questioning of well, what happened in that 27 minutes? Why did it take that long? And then there was a whole chain of emails where they had to draft up the email. Someone was told they had to draft up this tweet, but then they had to send it for approval to this higher up person, and then they didn't have all the information. So it's basically a chain of demand that's just a total nightmare that ended up being 27 minutes of, and you don't really have time in that moment. Time is not something that you're going to have, and they took a lot of it.
Yeah, and similarly with them finally releasing that the police car was a replica, because they're saying that as soon as they found that information out, once Lisa came forward, they released it, but it was actually hours later, because I guess apparently they were waiting to get a picture of the actual car with the actual numbers to post with it. So they waited 3 hours to get that info out there after Lisa had confirmed it for them. So it's I don't know what they were waiting for, that picture, but that doesn't seem like enough for them to sit on that info. You can tweet again after. It's not one tweet and that's final. It's you can tweet multiple times.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I don't know what they were afraid of, and I don't know. They were afraid of giving wrong information, so they just didn't give any information, I guess. There was also a list of all of the draft tweets, because apparently there was a ton of tweets that were in their draft section and there was multiple different versions of the tweets before they actually went out. This is one of the documents from the Mass Casualty Commission, and it's Exhibit A to Miss Scanlon's affidavit, attached a number of draft tweets from the H Division Strategic Communications Unit tweet bank. It includes the following draft messages. Just one of them is like RCMP responding to complaints of an active shooter in, around, and then in brackets location. The area is near, in brackets, large landmark or community name or event name. Avoid the area. Residents stay inside and away from windows, locked doors. And then another one is hashtag RCMPNS, asking people to avoid the area of XX and XX due to an ongoing incident. We will provide more details as soon as we can. So it's kind of like they put out, like they made the template and then they put like information, you know, like the XX, and then they're going to fill it in with information once they got it. But I don't really know. They just like release a list of all of these draft tweets. So it's like they had multiple different versions. It's like, at this time, we can confirm shots fired and multiple fatalities. The incident is ongoing. We will release confirmed info as soon as we can. Please continue to avoid the area of XX. Hashtag RCMPNS. So I don't really know. I guess that's just going to show that they were being very mindful with the tweets that were coming up, and they had like 10 different versions before they actually put it out, which is just weird to me. It's like, were they not frantic? Like, I don't understand. Like, how do you have time to make up draft tweets?
They probably didn't want to put out misinformation and cause a panic, because that, you know, could cause a lot of damage as well. If people are just out there shooting people because they think it's the killer or something, like if you have this panic, it can kind of make things worse. But they could have definitely done a little bit more. Didn't have to be perfect. They could have just provided a little bit more.
Yeah, and I guess that is a good point. I mean, I do understand that you have to be mindful with, you know, a very public platform. You can't put out misinformation, but I guess their resolution to putting out misinformation was to put out no information, which is worse, or maybe not worse, but equally as annoying.
They could have done the simple thing and just put out generic information like stay in your house, lock your door, and shut your window or shut your blinds. Like, and they could have done that not just on Twitter and other social media, but they should have done that as a public alert. They've learned their lesson since then, though, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, if something, God forbid, ever like this happened again, I'm sure they would. But I mean, what's the harm in putting out an alert? Yeah, you don't want to cause a panic, but isn't that going to... I mean, most people, when they get that alert, are going to just do it. They're not going to go out and like, oh, let's go... I'm going to take my own gun and try to, like, you know what I mean? Like, most people are going to follow the advice, and then people are in their homes. And all those people that were like along the route, like that woman who was jogging and was shot, like, and the car, he stole her car and all of this stuff, like, all those people wouldn't have been out and about necessarily if they had gotten that alert. So I just don't see what the harm would have been in just putting out that alert and dealing with the immediate concern of getting everyone in their homes and then worrying about the panic after the fact. You know what I mean? Yes, there might be a panic, but that's like an issue for another day or later that same day after they make sure that he doesn't kill anybody else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to say, because like I get alerts, like emergency alerts almost like every month now from just random things that are happening in Halifax or whatever. Like yesterday or the day before I got one, but an Amber Alert from Cape Breton.
Yeah, and like I just think like, okay, if right now you got an emergency alert that said stay in your homes, it's an active shooter situation in Nova Scotia, just lock your doors, stay inside. Like, yeah, you're going to be panicking, but then after the fact, when you realize what happened, you're like, okay, thank God they sent me that because I was at home. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's going to be so much less backlash. In the moment, you might have panic, but it's going to result in people being thankful for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, even like Jennifer was saying, like just generic tweets, like he's left the Port-au-Peak area, so, you know, be on the lookout along that route. They think he's traveling to Halifax, like stay alert in that area. If you're, you know, in Halifax, stay in your house, lock your doors. So, I mean, just warning people that he was out there and on the loose would have went a long way.
And like Katie and Stephanie were talking about earlier too, like you guys don't use Twitter, and like not a lot of older, like the seniors and like older people and stuff use social media at all, and a lot of them don't even have a fucking cell phone, for God's sake. So it's like, how are they gonna know to stay inside during the situation? And how are like a lot of people who don't use social media in general gonna know about the situation? Like, it's just, it doesn't make any fucking sense to me, like how the RCMP responded to this at all.
Mm-hmm. And like you said too, it didn't have to be perfect. Like, if they knew a general idea of where he was, just say in this area, stay inside. Like, they don't have to know the exact like coordinates. You know what I mean? Like, just put out the basic information you have, which is better than nothing.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think the fact that they did use Twitter and that they didn't put as much info as they should have out there, that all that misinformation and people saying things that weren't true made everything this kind of worse, because nobody knew what was actually happening. Nobody knew what was the truth. And so maybe it did cause a little bit of panic when if they actually had info coming from the police, they would know a little bit more and, be more informed about the situation rather than just making stuff up and taking stuff from Joe Blow down the lane, what he said. You know what I mean? So,
well, if somebody was in my neighborhood shooting people and I get a blast at 12 a.m. at night, that's not going to be the worst thing happened.
Well, I do remember something came out, this is not related at all, but something came out where people were mad because they were getting interrupted by Amber Alerts in the States or something at all hours of the night, and they just didn't want to see this Amber Alert come in through their phone and wake them up. Fuck off.
Yeah. And I also wondered, a thought I had randomly, I just wonder also if the time of day played a factor, because it was at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, if they're thinking oh, well, we don't want to put an alert and wake everyone up. You know what I mean? I feel and then it happened overnight and into the early morning. So I don't know. Sounds like the States. Sounds like, I know, fuck off. That's the thing, is people are very selfish too. It's well, it woke me up out of my sleep. Who cares about this missing person, or who cares about what's happening? I got woken up, as if it's the worst thing in the world, which is really annoying. But I just wonder if maybe, I don't know. And it was such a rural community too. I don't know. I feel maybe if it happened in the city, would that have changed their, if it happened in Halifax at first, would that have changed anything about their response to it? Probably would have. He probably wouldn't have been able to, I don't know. Do you think if it happened in downtown Halifax right away, first thing at 10 o'clock?
But they might have been more ready to handle it, right?
Yeah.
Because, Halifax has seen a lot of violence in its day, so those police are probably way more equipped to deal with something like that than, the little Portapique RCMP.
Yeah, that's true. And I feel the fires and stuff, you're not going to get too far in Halifax. If you set a fire to something, it's going to be reported more quickly than, this one was still reported pretty quickly. But I'm saying, he could have shot someone and gotten out before it was necessarily reported, right? But the fires itself, you're not going to have something on fire for too long before somebody in the city downtown is going to report it, right? So I don't know.
And I'm just reading another article from CBC News. This came out April 2022. It's about the police officers that opened fire on that fire hall, and one of the officers is saying that he was 100% sure that the perpetrator was in there for some reason. And so that's why they made that split-second decision to get out and shoot. Yeah, they said that, he said, quote, "I was sure that he was. If he got away, he was going to kill more people, because there was no doubt in my mind that that's the guy we were looking for." So maybe he was talking about that guy outside. He just was completely sure that was him for some reason. Which, makes sense. That's why he would. But he didn't, not he had any confirmation that he was even in that area. So he just took it upon himself, thought he was doing a good thing, but could have turned out really bad. And also, it's another thing, another article here talking about just the miscommunication with the radio issues that they were having. Apparently it came out that they were talking about the technical aspects of their radio system, and they figured out that a lot of the functions weren't being used, or the police didn't actually know how to use their radios all the way or completely, or use all the functions. So that could have been a problem where they actually didn't even hear that woman say something over the radio because they didn't know how to use it. So that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a problem for sure. But also, it's just crazy to think that okay, the police are not taking action enough in the area where he actually is, and then you have people taking action too much in the area where he's not, which is at the fire department or the firehouse, the fire hall. So it's it's just crazy. I don't know.
Yeah, just a lot of miscommunication, a lot of unpreparedness, and it made for this tragedy to be a lot worse than it should have been.
Speaking of malfunctioning equipment, did you guys read on the article, on any of the articles, about the fact that the only working helicopter was under maintenance?
Of course it was. I didn't read that, but yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I did read that. like they have one working helicopter and it's under maintenance at the time. Of course.
Like, how convenient, right?
Yeah, I did read that. I don't think Gabriel would have known that, obviously, but it's just like a crazy coincidence. But also, didn't he have, I can't remember if someone said this already, but did he have access to the police radios? Like, you know how you can listen to the police radio? Like, anyone can just tune into the police radio. So it's almost like if he had that, he would have known where they were at and he could have known how to avoid them.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, I think there's somebody else I know who has one.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you can buy those like radars and, you know, and people do listen to what the police are talking about, so they know what's going on all the time. So that's super possible he could have gotten a hold of that.
He probably had one in his car.
Probably. I mean, if he's obsessed with the RCMP and like is having a replica and everything, like he could have had a police radar thing. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just every day the RCMP in Nova Scotia is getting embarrassed because of all the stuff that's coming out, and it's just making them look really bad, which I'm good, because they deserve to be called out for all their shit that they did.
Yeah, hopefully they just like improve their system and more training and just more readiness for, God forbid, something like this ever happens again. They'll be way more prepared and it won't get to the level that it did next time.
Yeah. And hopefully there isn't a next time, and hopefully if there is, they've learned a thing or two. Because they should have. And also, who knows how much, like, now they're probably like panicking and like, not saying they're trying to cover stuff up, but like they know that all this stuff's going to get released. It's like, who knows how many people are like freaking out right now about like what's going to come out next. Like, it's just, if I were them, I would not be, you know, calm right about now. I'm sure they're not. But yeah, so it's just crazy. I know we did, in the first season, we did the Carissa Boudreau case, and then we did the Nicole Doucette case, and those were both in Nova Scotia, but this is only the third one in the whole podcast that we've done that took place in Nova Scotia, and just always like hits home a little bit differently when it's in Nova Scotia. And it's also hard to believe I had never even heard of Portapique before this happened. I remember reading it, I'm like, where's Portapique? I feel like being in Nova Scotia, you just feel like you know all the communities because it's not a very big place. So when you hear a community, but yeah, it feels a little bit different when it's literally in your home province, and it just, I don't know, it's just really sad and such a mess, and it's horrible. I feel bad for all the families who have to relive it every day with this inquiry, even though they want answers, and I'm sure they're happy to a large extent that there is this inquiry, but even if they're not happy with how it's always going down all the time. But it's also one of those things, it's like you want to know all the horrible things that happened, but also you don't want to know in some ways, right? Because you don't want to hear like how your loved one could have had their death prevented if the RCMP actually did their job correctly. So I don't know, just really shitty.
And just kind of pay respects to all the victims, because everybody in these cases seems to know the killer's name, and so I just kind of want to say the names of every victim just to get their names out there and so people are aware. So the 22 people who died April 18th and April 19th, 2020, we have Gina Goulet, Dawn Goletchin, Jolene Oliver, Frank Goletchin, Sean McLeod, Alana Jenkins, John Zoll, Lisa McCulley, Joey Weber, Heidi Stevenson, Heather O'Brien, Jamie Blair, Christian Beaton, Lillian Campbell, Joanne Thomas, Peter Bond, Tom Bagley, Greg Blair, Emily Tuck, Joy Bond, Corey Ellison, and Aaron Tuck.
That about does it for our finale episode. I don't know what to say. It's hard to like segue out of that, but thank you so much for listening in this season. It's been a great season, and we like I said, we're gonna put some resources in the show notes for people who like, for mental health resources and counseling resources for victims of gun violence, and you just want to put that in the show notes for this episode. But I just want to say thank you to Jennifer for coming on the episode and talking about this case with us, And thank you to all of our listeners who have been with us this whole season and for the seasons before. And we're looking forward to our next season. So we're going to start planning our cases for that. And so definitely during the break, you can still interact with us on all the social medias during this little break in between seasons. And if there's any major updates for any of our cases, we'll keep you updated through our social media channels as well. So definitely follow us there. We're on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast. We're on Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1. And we're on Facebook at Crime Family Podcast. You can send us an email at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com if you have a case suggestion or some feedback for us. Let us know what you like, what you want to see improved, or any suggestions you have. And like I said, this is going to be the time, since we're going to be planning in the next month or two our cases for the next season. So this is a great time to send us those case suggestions because we're still putting our list together of what cases we want to cover. So if you suggest one, we'll look into it and we may cover it on our next season. So also you can go to our website at crimefamilypodcast.ca. You can listen to all our episodes there, and you can read transcripts of the episodes and all of that stuff. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcast or anywhere you listen to our show. If there is a review function, definitely leave us a review. We'd love to know your thoughts. And follow us on your favorite podcast app as well, and leave us a star rating or whatever you can do on your podcast app to show your support. We would love that. So thank you guys so much for a great season. We hope you'll come back with us for our next season when we debut that. So yeah, thank you guys so much. And again, thank you to Jennifer for coming on for this finale because it was a great discussion. And yeah, we'll see you next season. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.